So we've talked about the blood. We've talked about the heart. Now we need to talk about the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. So if you think about your cardiovascular system as a huge transport system, your blood is actually the vehicle. It's the delivery truck, it's the pickup truck, it's the train that carries things from point A to point B. Your heart is the power behind it. It's the actual push that pushes those things from point A to point B. Your arteries, your veins, and your capillaries are the highway system. They are literally the roads that the blood can use to carry things from point A to point B. Arteries are kind of the outlet as far as carrying things away. I've already kind of talked about that. These are things that carry things away from the heart. The veins are always coming toward the heart. The capillaries, they're kind of like the stops along the way. They are the ones that, they are the areas that the exchange is happening, whether that's picking up waste or dropping off oxygen or nutrients, or in the case of it going to the kidneys, this is where they drop off the waste products that go out in the urine. So let's go through the basic structure of these three things. So looking at them, an artery is fairly thick-walled. If you look over here, you can see that the wall of this is pretty thick. The hole, which we call a lumen, and lumen means the same thing whenever you hear it. It basically just means the hole in the middle. So this is called the lumen. Lumen. If I could spell, that'd be better. Okay, so the lumen is fairly small, actually. Now, thing to keep in mind, arteries are the first thing that receive that pressure from the heart when the heart is contracting. So the amount of push against the wall of this tubing is rather substantial right when it's coming out of the heart. So the arteries kind of have to have that thick wall there in order to withstand that pressure. Veins, however, veins tend to have a relatively thin wall. If you look at the thickness of this compared to the thickness of this, it's not as thick. One of the reasons that that happens is because by the time that you go from the arteries to the capillaries back to the veins, that pressure that started really, really strong coming out of the arteries really isn't that strong anymore. Because think about it. If I go from a hose this big to a hose this big to a hose this big to an itty bitty teeny tiny hose that's like the size of a straw, and then start getting into bigger and bigger hoses, that same pressure that I started with in the very, very big hose isn't really going to be there as I go to bigger and bigger hoses. So they don't have to do that. Something else. All of that pressure that I started with when I contracted the heart really hard to get everything going and get it out of the heart to get it into the body, that pressure isn't as high anymore. So one of the other things that you will see when you look at veins are these things. Remember the valves in the heart and how they opened one way really well, but then when you tried to push back, they slammed shut? Veins have those as well because, again, that difference in pressure, the fact that you've lost that pressure means that when I get it going forward, I don't want it to be able to come back because there is no push from behind to keep it going in that direction. Capillaries. Capillaries are pretty much the most simple out of the three. It is one layer of squamous cells. So one layer of these squished cells. Why only one layer of cells? Well, if this is going to be my depot for being able to drop things off and pick things up, I can't have a whole bunch of cells that I have to get through. whenever I talk about exchanging through not a membrane, a wall of cells, I always try to remember to kind of give the example of somebody crashing through an inch of styrofoam. If there is a huge sheet of styrofoam in front of me and it's only an inch thick, I can break through that like the Kool-Aid man, no big deal. Oh yeah, no big deal. It's this big, no problem. But if we're talking about a 6-foot piece of styrofoam, me being able to get through that, I could run at it with all my weight behind me and it's not going to matter. I will hit it and bounce back. If it's 6 feet thick, there is no way that I'm just going to burst through it. When we are talking about the movement of the blood is relatively fast. So being able to exchange through and pick things up has to happen really, really quickly. You have to have a very, very thin wall that you can just get past in order for that to happen. If you have cells and cells and cells, it's just not going to happen. So this is the first picture of what they look like. Here's another one. Again, if you look at all of the layers, here's that lumen that I told you about, and you look at a vein and how thin and how big the lumen is dead center, and then the capillary. Look at how thin wall that is, because literally you just have that one layer of cells. Even when you look at a slide with an artery and a vein, you can tell the difference based on what the walls look like. Look at this artery. Thick wall, looks very sturdy, holds its shape really, really well. Meanwhile, the veins wall is what, half that, if half that, maybe even a third of that. And it looks almost like a deflated balloon, like it can't hold its shape very well. So this is a slide of an artery. Again, look at that wall, super, super thick. A vein, look at that wall, very, very thin. And a capillary. See this little teeny tiny circle here? That's the capillary. I'm going to grab this and bring it closer. Okay. Look at that capillary. One layer of cells. That's all a capillary is. And you can definitely see a difference in size between them. When you've got a capillary or a vein in a slide, it's very simple to tell the difference. The arteries are huge. The capillaries are tiny and only one cell thick, and the veins, again, they look like a deflated balloon. There is no real shape to them. Looking at the wall, at the capillary, the wall of the capillary, really, really up close, that's one cell. This is one cell. Again, they're not huge. They're very, very compact, and they're very thin walled, so that when I get to my pit stop, I can get out and get to where I need to go. When I'm picking up waste products, it can get to me through that wall of one layer of cells. Looking at a wall of an artery, you've got this internal elastic membrane. See that pink line? That's that internal elastic membrane. Internally, I also have endothelial cells. You can see them right past that internal elastic membrane. And I didn't ever erase lumen, did I? Okay. Here, tunica media. Tunica, ooh, fancy tunic. It's basically layer, okay? So this is the middle layer. We've got the internal elastic membrane, the tunica media, and then we've got the tunica adventitia. So adventitia is a connective tissue layer that basically helps to suspend everything where it needs to be. So let's say this needs to hang, somewhere in your body. You've got this connective tissue that kind of holds it in place. so that it stays suspended. That's what the tunica adventitia is. And it surrounds this artery so that it holds it in place in the body. Now, here's another artery. You can see that internal elastic membrane. You can still see that dark pink layer. In this case, we actually do have better endothelial cells. You can actually see them quite a bit better here, as opposed to where that elastic membrane is. Here's that tunica media, and here's that adventitia again. And you can definitely see a difference between the texture of the tunica media and the texture of the adventitia. This looks very smooth, that smooth muscle layer that we're used to. This is more of a connective tissue, like I said, that helps to kind of suspend everything where it's supposed to be. So let's start with the arteries. So the arteries coming out of the heart, you know the aortic arch, the ascending aorta, the aortic arch, and the descending. Now remember what I said about your right side only has one primary branch, and then your left kind of goes in two directions. So if you look here, this is that brachiocephalic trunk that we saw on the heart, okay? So we get past that, and it becomes the right common carotid and the subclavian. So this trunk splits here. However, on the left side, it immediately becomes that common carotid. It immediately becomes that subclavian going down into the arm. Here is the axillary as we get closer to the armpit, and down here is the brachial. Again, if you think back to AP1, that was that one figure where I said, if you learn this terminology, a lot of things will make sense. Brachial means arm. So the brachial artery being part of your upper arm makes sense. Axillary means armpit. So the axillary artery being around the area of the armpit makes sense. Subclavian, your clavicle, right under there, makes sense. Okay. So the external carotid, the internal carotid, arteries. I already went through the aortic arch. You know the pulmonary trunk. It isn't an artery, it's a vein. I'm sorry. Brain fart. You can tell I am tired. The pulmonary trunk, again, it's an artery because it's going away from the heart. You've got the left coronary artery under there. The thoracic aorta. Okay. So your aorta comes up, it's ascending, the arch, and then it goes descending. When it is above your diaphragm, we call it the thoracic aorta. The minute that it gets past the diaphragm and is in your abdomen, we call it the abdominal aorta. So this area that they're pointing out, literally right below the heart, is going to be that thoracic part of that aorta. The celiac trunk is here. The splenic artery is there. The renal artery is right here. It's going to be going to your kidneys. And the superior mesenteric is right there. Now, just like what you saw in the heart, you're going to see these repeated over and over. And there is no difference. They are still the same things that I pointed out in this slide. So when we get to those, you'll see that they will be bolded and there will be a star next to them so that you can actually see it's the same thing, just a different picture of the same thing. It's not new information. So just to kind of reiterate, the brachiocephalic trunk on the right versus the common carotid and the subclavian on the left. So here's that aortic arch, right? There's the brachiocephalic. that splits into the right common carotid and into the right subclavian. Here, this is already the left common carotid coming off of that aorta. This is the left subclavian coming off of that aorta, okay? Not new information, just kind of a better picture, because in the other picture, they've got the guy like this, and you can't see how both sides are coming up. This one you can, okay? Okay, so coming down into the forearm, you've got the radial artery and the ulnar artery. Don't forget that if we're ulnar, we're always on the side of the pinky. P-U, pinky ulna, okay? That automatically means the radial, the radial is going to be on the thumb side. Here's the abdominal aorta. Remember what I had said about as you go down, it becomes the thoracic, get past the diaphragm, it's the abdominal. So there's the abdominal aorta. Here's the inferior mesenteric artery. Mesenteric is all of the little arteries and veins that go into your intestines. So that's the branch that goes off into your intestines. The internal iliac, see how this is splitting? These are the ones that are going to go down into your legs. Iliac, remember that the ilium is that butterfly wing on your pelvis. So the iliac is going to be right there where your pelvis is. You've got the external iliac. And as you come down, it becomes, this artery here is the deep femoral. This one coming forward is the femoral. The popliteal is the back of your knee. So the popliteal is going to be on the back of your knee. That term is referring to the back of your knee. So again, if you go back to chapter 1, that one figure that has all of that terminology, that's where that's coming from. We've got the anterior tibial, the posterior tibial, the fibular, and then the dorsalis pedis. So the back of your foot, okay, pedis, your foot, for pedia, blah, blah. What am I looking for? What's the word? Podiatrist. There we go. Okay. Anything with a star, we've already discussed. Subclavian artery, brachiocephalic, common carotid, vertebral, external, internal carotid. This has already been shown in the other picture. So it's not new, okay? So we've got that subclavian. Here's my common carotid, right? This is the thyrocervical trunk. Cervical because it's right next to the cervical vertebra, okay? Thyro because it's right next to the thyroid too, okay? You've got the carotid sinus here, where it splits into the internal and the external carotid. So the sinus is kind of that space right before you split. The maxillary artery, right where you got your maxilla, okay? It's coming up to your upper jaw. The occipital, because this is your occipital bone. The posterior auricular artery. It's right behind your ear. Here's your external auditory meatus, the ear hole for your ear. And then you've got the superficial temporal artery right next to your temporal bone. Now, coming toward the front of the face, you've got the superior thyroid artery. There's your thyroid. It's on top of it and above it, okay? You've got the lingual artery. That would be where your tongue would be. That makes sense? Then you've got your facial artery. Look at how much of your face that's coming to. So that, again, makes sense. Facial artery would be on your face. Okay, I'm going to still pause for a second because I really need to blow my nose. All right. This is the right side. How do I know that? This is the brachiocephalic artery. Remember, that's only on the right side of the body. Again, it splits to become the carotid and the subclavian. There's that thyrocervical trunk that's going to go up to the cervical vertebra and in front to the thyroid. Here's the vertebral artery coming off of that. The thyroacromial artery. So you remember the acromion process on your scapula? Okay. I'm sorry, thoracoacromial. Yeah. Coming down, you've got the humeral circumflex artery. Notice how it's going around the circumference, right? So circumflex. The brachial, again, the upper arm. And this one goes kind of up above your elbow. This one goes behind it. So it's the deep brachial artery. Coming forward from there, okay? You've got the lateral thoracic artery. Thoracic, again, your thorax, where your heart and your lungs are. You've got the axillary artery. Where's your armpit? Right here, so that makes sense. And then here's your scapula, right? Subscapular, right below your scapula artery. Forearm. We've seen the radial, we've seen the ulnar. Let's go into the hand. Okay? Palmar, your palm of your hand. You've got a deep palmar arch. Makes sense. It's deeper, it's closer to your wrist. It is an arch shape and it's in your palm. You've got the superficial palmar arch, which is actually closer to where your fingers are. And then your digital arteries, your fingers, okay? And any of these would be considered a digital artery because they are in your fingers. Okay, so new thing. See these that are in blue? These are organs that are not cardiovascular system organs. So they are just organs kind of giving you a landmark so that you can see where these things are. But just so you know, they're not going to be on your practical. It's the arteries, it's the veins. Those are the ones that I'm interested in. Okay. So here is my ascending aorta. Here's my aortic arch. Remember I told you, as it started descending, it would become the thoracic and the abdominal. So there's the thoracic aorta. That's descending, but it's also the thoracic. Your diaphragm would be right about here. So that aorta coming down would be the abdominal, okay? So coming up, my brachiocephalic artery, right subclavian, common carotid. Left side immediately becomes the common carotid artery and the subclavian. Do you see these arteries along the backs of the ribs here? They're on the back surface of that rib. They're the posterior intercostal artery. So in between, the costal cartilage is that cartilage in between the ribs, okay? And those spaces are actually called the intercostal spaces for in between the ribs. So these are those arteries. They're the ones between each rib. Excuse me. This right here, coming off of that subclavian, we just pointed it out in the last slide. This is going to be the internal thoracic artery. Notice that it's behind the ribs, so it's internal. See, this is coming around the front of the ribs. This was on the back side, now this is coming around the front here. These are the anterior intercostal arteries. Here's my liver, here's my stomach, here's my spleen. Coming down, abdominal aorta, See that branch coming out here and how it's going to the intestines? This is my superior mesenteric artery. That's the one that's on top. Down here, there's another that also comes to my intestines. This is the inferior mesenteric artery. Common iliac. This is where my hip bones are, that butterfly wing of my hip bones. My left internal iliac, you'll notice this one's coming this way, this one's going that way, almost like it would be going to my bladder. Here's the external. So we've got the common, it splits into the internal and the external. And then here, that would be where your vertebral sacrum is, right? The very bottom of your vertebra. This is the internal sacral artery. So, internal thoracic, right subclavian and common carotid, brachiocephalic, left common carotid, left subclavian, the aortic arch, the ascending aorta, those posterior intercostal arteries, anterior intercostal arteries, because they're coming around the front, coming down. We've got the visceral arteries, in other words, your internal organs. Superior phrenic. When you hear phrenic in A&P, phrenic means your diaphragm. So superior, on top of the diaphragm. Here's my diaphragm. There it is. Comes down and kind of spreads out over my diaphragm. I think that was everything. Although that internal thoracic should have a star by it. Sorry about that. All right, now this is below my diaphragm. This was above, from my diaphragm up. Now we're going from diaphragm down. Again, not part of the cardiovascular, not part of the cardiovascular, not part of the cardiovascular, but landmarks to tell you where things are. So this is my abdominal aorta. Remember, once it gets past the diaphragm, it's the abdominal aorta. Here is my diaphragm. Here are the arteries feeding it from the underside, right? So this is the inferior phrenic arteries. Okay, suprarenal. What does superior mean? Above, right? Renal is just a fancy way of saying kidney. So suprarenal, above the kidney, okay? Or on top of the kidney. Now, here are the renal arteries. Renal means kidney, so it literally goes directly into the kidney itself. The gonadal arteries, these right here, it depends on if you're a girl or a boy as to their destination. If you're a boy, should be heading toward the testes. If you're a girl, it's going to be heading toward the ovaries. And then you've got the lumbar arteries. So that lower back vertebra, the big thick ones that look like a moose from the side. Celiac trunk right here. Superior mesenteric arteries, same one that went to your intestines. Inferior mesenteric, same one that went to your intestines from the last slide. Common iliac, same one that was in the last slide. You've got that splitting, so there's the external going out and the internal going in, and then that same medial sacral that was going down the sacrum in the middle of your vertebra. Now, looking at the upper leg, there's my abdominal aorta. Here's my common iliac. Okay. The external, lateral circumflex. See how it goes around? Okay. The descending branch of the lateral circumflex artery. So here's the circumflex, and then this one goes down, right? Okay. So, median sacral, still in the center. Internal iliac. So there's common, splits into the external, internal, same old, same old. Here's the lateral sacral. Here's my sacrum. It's on the side of it, lateral sacral. Internal pudendal. This is actually going to go to your bladder and to the pelvic floor. And then the obturator artery, remember that this hole in the pelvis is called the obturator foramen. So that makes sense where it's at. The femoral artery is a continuation of my external iliac, okay? And then the deep femoral is going to be where this branches and goes deep into the leg as opposed to more toward the surface. And both of these are basically mirror images of each other. It's just that one's the right leg, this one's the left leg. Now, lower leg. Notice that the popliteal is behind the knee. This is from the front, like you're looking at somebody's knee. This is the back of somebody's leg. There's the popliteal in the back. Here, you can tell that it's behind this bone. Okay, the genicular arteries. Those are going to be these here, okay? The anterior tibial is going to be on the front of the tibia. The posterior tibial is going to be along the back. Here's my tibia of the tibia. The fibular is going to be here with my fibula. The dorsalis pedis, again, back of my foot. Medial plantar, remember plantar flexion was pointing your toes? That's going to be here, kind of toward the medial portion of your ankle and your foot. And then you've got, again, the digital arteries, except instead of this time it being the fingers, it's the toes. Okay.